My name is Laura, and I'm 33. I don't like to talk about myself too much, but sometimes the past, which seems to have been left behind blind doors, suddenly knocks and asks to be heard at least a little. I am currently working as a freelance web designer. I work from home, but I find contracts myself. Having the freedom and the opportunity to build my own schedule, I feel like I'm living, not just existing. It used to be different, a strict schedule, gray office walls, where I was just one of the cogs in a huge faceless machine. Now it's freedom. It's like I'm floating, breaking out of the deadening routine I was living in back then. My home has become my personal workspace, where I can choose projects, a team, an approach, and most importantly, I can determine the rhythm and style of my work myself. Anthony, my husband, is completely different. He is 6 years younger than me and has established himself in the sales field in his own way, working for a home appliance company. His life is a constant movement, business trips, new acquaintances. He often leaves, his working days are spent among clients and negotiations. Our worlds are so different. I am quiet and thoughtful, he is active and mobile. I like to work quickly and as efficiently as possible, using the capabilities of a computer and the internet, and Anthony prefers to act more deliberately, slowly. He is steady, even stubborn, and although his approach often takes more time, he has a charming clumsiness with which he looks so natural in his affairs. There is something painfully sweet about him. This clumsiness makes me smile every time, even if I initially want to correct him or suggest something. Anthony is the kindest person, full of warmth and care. I see this not only in his attitude towards me, but also in his love for his family, for his younger sister Patricia, whom he is ready to talk about for hours. Patricia is 8 years younger than Anthony. When we first started dating, she was only 15. A small, inquisitive, glowing girl, all absorbed in her studies and her school achievements. In the eyes of her parents, she is a real miracle, their pride and joy, because despite all the difficulties and obstacles, she studies excellently. Teachers highly appreciate her aspirations and abilities, and she is the child who always pleases and inspires her loved ones. Anthony is proud of her. There is immeasurable joy in every phrase he says about Patricia, but at the same time a certain anxiety. He confessed to me more than once that his parents really want to give her the opportunity to study at the prestigious private school she dreams of, but their financial situation complicates this. They worked in agriculture all their lives, working on the land that their fathers and grandfathers cultivated, and never complained about fate, but always dreamed that their children would have a better future. Sending Patricia to a private school is like sending her to a new, brighter life, where she will have a better chance of success, freedom of choice and perspective, which they themselves lacked so much. Anthony, of course, understands their desire to give their sister what they could not have, and sees how important it is for them. They don't want Patricia to experience the same hardships as them. They believe that this is her chance, and they are ready to sacrifice everything they have over and over again for it. But that's exactly what worries Anthony. He went through college feeling every day how much effort his parents put into his education. It was their gift, their work, and he couldn't let them down. Now it's Patricia. Again, for the sake of the child, for the sake of her chances for a better life, they are ready to sacrifice, even if it costs them considerable financial difficulties. I often notice mixed feelings in Anthony. On the one hand, he also wants Patricia to have a better future, but on the other hand, he sees how it drains his parents. Anthony said he was sure that if they explained the whole situation to Patricia, she would understand. She is someone who will never burden her loved ones, who has been taught to put family and love above all else. And yet, Patricia invaded our quiet and secluded everyday life, intertwined with work worries and mutual tenderness, with such ease, as if by accident. At first, these were rare visits. She came to us after school, laced with youthful enthusiasm and cheerful carelessness. Her laughter echoed through the room, filling our house with lightness and light, which I must admit I found sweet. Yes, there were moments of joy at the beginning, especially for Anthony, who seemed really happy to take care of his younger sister. But as time went on, each of her visits began to feel more insistent, almost obligatory. She came again and again, no longer just a neighbor, but almost a hostess, who unceremoniously sat down on our sofa, habitually hugged Anthony and casually threw smiles at me. One day I noticed how Patricia literally flew into our house and immediately called out to Anthony, "Are you home?" as if I was just a casual witness to their warm brotherly relationship. Her voice sounded light-hearted and naively demanding, like a child who had just received a gift, and it seemed ordinary to her, as if it were supposed to be. She deftly climbed onto the sofa, wrapping her arms around Anthony, and I suddenly felt something unpleasant, as if an alien cold had penetrated my skin. Her constant presence caused a slight jealousy, unwanted but irresistible. Patricia was young, energetic, charming, and seemed to always want to be the center of attention. At the same time, she possessed the art of communication. In those moments when she noticed that I was watching, she only snuggled closer to Anthony, as if confirming that this was her brother, her blood, her family right. "Patricia, would you like some tea or juice?" I asked cautiously, trying to distract her from Anthony and maybe take the initiative a little bit. She answered my question too quickly, almost abruptly, as if this gesture was something ordinary and unimportant for her. I felt a flash of annoyance, but I kept my outward calm, deciding that I could offer her a drink now, but in the future, if she was going to come so often, she would have to take care of herself. I got up and headed to the kitchen, trying to distract myself by making tea and thinking that maybe it was just difficult for her to adjust to her new life in this city and break away from family habits. When I returned, Patricia was talking to Anthony about some of her schoolwork, clearly not paying much attention to me. But as soon as Anthony grabbed the phone and left the room, her behavior changed dramatically. The slight smile and friendly expression disappeared, replaced by a cold and focused seriousness. "Why would someone like you marry my brother?" she whispered, almost maliciously, looking at me with piercing eyes. "You're not good enough for him," she continued, as if I was somehow to blame for her, as if Anthony was something I took away from her. I was surprised by this sudden cold disregard, but I tried not to lose my composure and answered her with a smile. "What if I just know a big secret about your brother, and this is my reason?" Her face twitched for a moment, and she snorted in annoyance. "Don't talk nonsense." "I'm not afraid of you," she snapped, as if she knew in advance that victory would be on her side. "It's annoying when adults treat me like a child. If you were younger and nicer, everything would be different. But you're too old for Anthony." Her voice sounded venomous, almost contemptuous. It was as if she wanted to emphasize every word, making it painfully tangible. "Do you think that because you're older than my brother, you can give him something worthwhile? You need to support him not with words, but with money, and working from home hardly gives you what he really needs." Patricia's words sounded painful, as if they had been lashed with a whip. She is still too young to understand that not everything is measured by salary and the number of hours worked. But her confidence in her rightness and open hostility at some point shook my calmness. Her words burned like icy rain, and I felt anger begin to rise in my soul. I didn't answer her, just smiled softly and said, "Patricia, there are a lot of things that you don't understand yet. But maybe one day you will also find love, which will mean much more to you than just career success or money." After our frank conversation with Anthony, I felt light, but I was still worried. He listened to me attentively, with rare concentration for him, barely interrupting or adding words. At one point, he slowly shook his head, as if for the first time he saw Patricia from the other side, and what he saw shocked him. "I can't believe," he said softly, "that she could do this." His words hung in the silence of the kitchen, where the smell of spoiled stew could still be felt. We stood opposite each other, and it seemed to me that we had both grown closer and more mature that night. Anthony sighed heavily, as if he realized that we had a difficult conversation with his sister ahead of us, and we might have to destroy the very serene picture of the family that he had cherished all these years. "She was always just a child," he continued, clearly thinking out loud. "I thought it was just teenage, that over time she would grow up, become more circumspect. But now—" He paused, as if searching for words to explain to himself that Patricia had crossed the line, and there were no more excuses for her behavior. A couple of days later, he said he had talked to her. I didn't press for details. I just caught the reluctant expression on his face and a slight chill in his voice when he said, "She promised not to interfere anymore." However, every time he mentioned Patricia, his face became tense and withdrawn. I felt that he still did not fully believe in her guilt, hoped that it was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Patricia reappeared a few days later, just as carelessly entering the house and barely glancing at me. An embarrassed silence hung in the air like an uninvited guest, but I knew her presence was inevitable until Anthony and she resolved their differences. She flashed Anthony a fleeting smile, and at that moment I caught something resembling a test in her gaze. As if she knew that he had been told about something, she tested him again, looking straight into his eyes, as if trying to read what he was thinking. He avoided making eye contact with her, concentrated on sorting through the papers on the kitchen table, but I could see his jaw clenching with tension, and how he literally restrained himself by willpower. Patricia walked past me, deliberately ignoring my presence, and sat down next to Anthony, quickly regaining her former confidence and assumed prettiness. I watched this silent performance in silence, noticing that Anthony seemed to have made the decision to keep his distance, although it was clearly not easy for him. "You know I can always help you," she said to Anthony, softly, but with some subtle challenge in her voice. "After all, family is what matters most," she added, giving me a reproachful look. It seemed that there was a hidden message in her words, a hint that she skillfully hid behind an innocent smile. Patricia looked at me with a composure that took my breath away. Her face remained impenetrable, as if in front of me was not my relative, but a complete stranger. I tried to collect my thoughts, even though I was completely panic-stricken. "Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where are my things?" She shrugged lazily, as if nothing special had happened. "What are you talking about, Laura? Maybe you just forgot where you put everything?" she said mockingly, raising one eyebrow. Her tone was so mocking that I felt my hands start to shake with anger and confusion. "Patricia, stop it. This is serious. My things are gone. They're gone." I turned and hurriedly scanned the room, desperately trying to find something that could explain what had happened. But everything said the same thing: my things had really been put away. Not just hidden, but deliberately removed, as if someone was deliberately trying to erase my tracks from this house. "Oh, Laura, you're being so dramatic," Patricia chuckled, folding her arms over her chest. "To be honest, it's kind of funny to me that you think someone would want to touch your stuff." She leaned closer, her face split into a grin that made me really scared. "Anthony probably just decided that you need to update something," she added with mock thoughtfulness, as if she was giving me a ridiculous but sarcastic thought. At that moment, I felt a wave of anger boiling in my chest, unbearable, like a hot coal that burns from the inside. "That's enough, Patricia," my voice sounded low and firm, completely unlike my usual one. "This is not a joke. My personal belongings that are dear to me have disappeared." I tried to hold back the tears, but my voice still faltered when I realized that I couldn't even tell Anthony how helpless and vulnerable I felt right now. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside, as if someone had entered the house, and I realized that Anthony had finally returned with the money. He quickly climbed the stairs and saw us standing opposite each other, as if in the midst of some kind of silent confrontation. I turned to him, and when I saw his confused expression, I felt relieved, as if someone had finally appeared who could at least resolve this madness a little. "Anthony," I said, trying to keep my composure. "Please explain to me what's going on. Why are my clothes and personal belongings gone? Do you know what about it?" He froze, stunned by my words, and cast a puzzled glance at Patricia, who shrugged nonchalantly, as if this situation did not concern her at all. When I entered the house, a familiar, soothing atmosphere enveloped me. I could smell Anthony's scent, mixed with the subtle scents of our house, wood polish and fresh lilies, which he always brought from the market. When I went into the living room, I saw him. He was standing in the doorway, looking out at the street. His gaze was serious, and there was a tension in his movements that I knew well. Anthony turned to me and immediately came over, hugging me tightly, as if he was afraid that I would disappear. "Thanks for coming," he whispered, not letting go of me. I felt the old affection awakening inside me, because he remained for me not just a husband, but a man with whom I shared all my dreams and joys. Pulling away, he looked into my eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this? Patricia is not the easiest, but—" "Anthony," I interrupted him, gently putting my hand on his shoulder. "We have to finish this. For both of us." I saw a shadow of regret cross his face, but there was also determination in his eyes. Patricia should have realized that her behavior would no longer be tolerated, that neither Anthony nor I would let her ruin our marriage or take advantage of our kindness. We headed into the kitchen, where I suspected Patricia was sitting. She met us with a strained look, but tried to keep her cool. The sight of her made me remember all the months that had passed, her derogatory words, her hidden hostility, her cheeky taunts. I saw a man in front of me whom I did not recognize, and this realization was painful. Anthony spoke first, his voice sounding firm and even a little harsh, which was unusual for him. "Patricia, that's enough. I cannot turn a blind eye to your behavior. It has gone beyond all bounds. You know that Laura doesn't deserve what you've given her." Patricia turned away abruptly, but there was something restless, barely noticeable in her gesture. I decided to take advantage of the moment and spoke too. My words were calm, but there was a power in them that I didn't seem to have before. "Patricia, this is our home. Anthony and I deserve happiness and peace, and we won't let anyone ruin that. You need to accept this and learn to live with respect for the boundaries of others." She nervously clasped her hands and suddenly stood up, brushing against a chair that creaked hollowly on the tile. "So you're both against me now, huh?" "We've always been against it," she hissed, but her voice was trembling. "I've always been superfluous. Always." I felt as if a heavy shadow had spread over my heart. For the first time, I saw Patricia not just as a destroyer of my peace, but as a person whose own wounds fed her resentment and anger. But that didn't change the point. "Patricia, each of us has our own place. But you have to understand that destroying someone else's is not the way to happiness. Your life is in your hands, and I sincerely hope that you can find something good that will bring you peace without harming others." Anthony was silent, but I knew he was there, and it gave me strength. Patricia darted her gaze from me to him, her face a mixture of anger and confusion, as if something inside her had finally cracked. Patricia froze, her face reflecting fear and confusion as she realized the seriousness of my words. Her eyes darted as if she was looking for a way out of this new, unfamiliar situation, and now, a desperate thought of rebellion flashed in her gaze, but Anthony interrupted her thoughts with a soft but insistent voice. "Patricia, this is not a discussion. You have to understand that Laura gave you a chance, and it's the last one. You either accept it and learn to respect her work and contribution, or you lose all the privileges that we tried to provide for you. We can't stand your attitude anymore, and it's time for you to understand the consequences of your actions." She sighed angrily again, as if refusing to admit defeat, but something changed in her eyes, as if she finally felt the walls closing around her. I could see how a guess about the real state of things was breaking through in her mind. All these years she believed that her environment existed for her well-being, and did not suspect that hard work and sacrifices were behind it. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks, but it seemed like she couldn't afford to leave by giving up school. She exhaled heavily, looked away, and finally, quietly, but with some humility, said, "Okay. I'll do what you said. I'll clean up after myself, help around the house. Just please don't deprive me of my studies. I need this education." I looked at her carefully, noticing that her tone was no longer the same defiant tone. There was something close to recognition in it. Deep down, I felt a faint hope that perhaps this confused girl, who disguised her insecurity behind a mask of anger, still had sincere aspirations. They had just been drowned under a layer of resentments and disappointments for a long time. "We both want you to have a future, Patricia," I said softly but firmly. "But for this you will have to learn responsibility not only at school, but also at home. And if you take on responsibilities, if you are serious and start contributing to the common life, I will pay for your remaining years of study. But understand, this is your last warning." Her lips trembled, and holding back sobs, Patricia nodded, lowering her head. Her shoulders slumped, as if her entire inner armor, carefully constructed over the years, had finally cracked. She stood silently, not looking at either Anthony or me, as if realizing that all her previous attempts at rebellion had proved powerless in the face of reality, which no longer required her to resist, but to make a conscious choice. I felt that this was the moment when she had to decide: either she would follow this new path, or she would continue to drown in her inner chaos. My life flashed before me like a kaleidoscope of moments filled with difficult but important lessons, meetings, forgiveness, and an abiding faith in change. I remembered how difficult that first step was, when I put Patricia in front of a tough choice, not knowing whether she would be able to accept it and become a better person, or reassert herself in her old, irreconcilable image. But every day she proved that she is capable of more. The year during which Patricia coped with household chores passed surprisingly quickly. At first, she clumsily took on simple tasks, but soon her every task became completed with special care. She gradually began to see in these routine activities not a burden, but an opportunity to create comfort, bring warmth into the house. This year seemed to have awakened something new in her, the ability to notice little things and find joy in them, even inspiration. She had always been ambitious, but now her single-mindedness has taken on a different color. She put that energy into her studies and then into her dreams. The entrance exams, which had previously seemed almost unattainable to her, now became only a new peak, and when the university admission results came in, her face shone with pride and gratitude. Since that time, our relationship has undergone wonderful changes. Patricia no longer saw me as an outsider in her life, and we had a real understanding. This became especially evident when, in her last year of study, she offered to cover her own tuition costs. This decision surprised me, but most of all it touched me how much her independence and maturity had grown. There was a confidence in her words that I had never heard before. Anthony and I couldn't help but be proud of her. Watching her gradually find her own path, becoming independent and self-confident, was one of the most significant joys that this complex but transformative story brought us. Her student years were busy and stressful. She managed to combine her studies and part-time work, studied in university clubs and gradually moved towards her main goal, writing a thesis and finding a job in the field she dreamed of. Her hard work, dedication, and commitment to excellence could not go unnoticed. Soon after graduation, she got a place in the company of her dreams. When she returned to us with the news of her first real job, we hugged her with the feeling that we had walked our path together, shoulder to shoulder, despite all the difficulties and doubts that once existed. Seeing Patricia now, independent and successful, was a real confirmation that our efforts were not in vain. But life did not stand still. A few years ago, a new joy came to our family. Our son was born, filling the house with new love and light. Patricia became his favorite guest and mentor. Her visits to us always brought fun and warmth, which used to be something alien to her. She learned to take care of him, to play with him, and in her eyes I saw how her perception of the family was changing. Now she became an integral part of it, no longer out of obligation, but out of her sincere desire. Anthony and I, watching our son grow up and Patricia stay close, felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road we have traveled has been full of trials, but every step, every difficult decision has led us to what we have now, a family bonded by real bonds of trust, forgiveness, and support. There was a joy in her that we no longer took for granted, and which we now cherish.